Welcome to the explainer. Have you ever noticed how incredibly fast a simple everyday disagreement can just completely spiral out of control? Well, today we're exploring a pretty fascinating framework called the architecture of rational discourse. We're going to uncover exactly how to take those chaotic, messy arguments and transform them into productive intellectual debates. It's really all about replacing that heated personal conflict with solid, logical engagement. And trust me on this, it's a total game changer.
So be honest with me here. Have you ever been in one of those incredibly frustrating debates where you just felt like literally no one was actually listening to you? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. It's basically the core problem with how we argue today. We get so caught up in the idea of winning the fight that we completely lose sight of the actual topic we started talking about. We just end up in these exhausting shouting matches that leave everyone irritated and absolutely nothing gets resolved. But what if we could actually systematically solve that? What if there was a literal blueprint for having better arguments? Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our blueprint for today. We'll be looking at the architecture of debate, step 1, active listening, spotting the logical flaws, dodging the fallacy trap, and finally, elevating the conversation. All right, kicking things off with section 1, the architecture of debate, student A versus student B. To really ground this in reality, let's imagine a classic debate over arts education funding between student A and student B. Now, to engage logically, student B has to follow a really strict four-part process. They need to use active listening, identify flaws, counter with evidence, and avoid fallacies. By sticking to this process, you're essentially creating a buffer. You attack the argument itself, not the actual person making it. And that is the exact mechanism that stops a smart debate from turning into a messy personal conflict. Let's break these steps down. Moving right along to section 2, step 1, active listening, comprehension over combat. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. When you're in a heated discussion, are you genuinely listening to the other person, or are you honestly just waiting for your turn to speak? We've all done it, right? It's such a common trap. But in our framework, student B absolutely cannot just wait to jump in. They have to actively listen. They need to take notes, whether that's mentally or on paper, and truly grasp student A's actual premises and conclusions. Because the reality is, you simply cannot dismantle an argument if you don't even understand what the argument is in the first place. Which brings us to section 3, spotting the logical flaws, cracks in the foundation. Okay, so you've listened actively. Now what? Well, you transition into the evaluation phase. You can't just passively accept whatever facts are handed to you. You've got to ask the hard questions. Are their premises actually true? Are the studies they're quoting accurate? Are the sources even reliable? Is their reasoning valid, or are they just making a massive, hasty generalization? This is essentially the detective work of rational discourse. You're actively hunting for those factual gaps in the opposing side's logic. So as an example, if student A claims that arts funding has to be maintained because arts education leads to higher test scores, well, student B needs to spot the potential gap there. They should ask, wait, does it definitively lead to higher test scores? By challenging that very specific causal link between arts and test scores, student B isn't being mean or argumentative for the sake of it. They're just demanding logical rigor. They're just making sure the foundation of student A's whole argument can actually hold weight. Now, for section 4, dodging the fallacy trap, the enemies of reason. As you're evaluating these arguments, there are some pretty massive pitfalls you absolutely have to avoid. And here is the first major trap, the ad hominem fallacy. This is when you launch a personal attack on your opponent instead of actually engaging with their argument. Going back to our students, this would be like student B just throwing their hands in the air and declaring, well, student A only cares about arts funding because they're terrible at math. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? It has absolutely zero to do with the actual funding data. It's just a pure emotional strike designed to undermine the person, not their premise. Then we have the second major trap, the straw man fallacy. This happens when you totally misrepresent your opponent's claims just to make them easier to attack. Just picture this absurd visual for a second. Imagine student B dragging in a literal scarecrow, holding a tiny little paintbrush, pointing at it and shouting, "So, student A wants to cut all of our science classes just to fund art?" Obviously, student A never said that. Student B just built a flimsy fake argument, a straw man, because let's face it, that is way easier to knock down than dealing with the actual complex reality of budget allocation. And when you put these two approaches side by side, I mean, the difference is literally night and day. Yelling, "You're just bad at math," is an ad hominem. It's deeply flawed, it's highly emotional, and it instantly shuts down any real communication. But calmly asking, "Is the causal link to test scores actually valid?" That is a logical counter. It's rational, it's based on evidence, and it actually invites further productive discussion.
This kind of rational counter is exactly what builds up the architecture of a good debate. Let's bring it home with Section 5, elevating the conversation, high-level discourse. So, how do we actually pull this off in the real world? You do it by presenting legitimate, solid counter evidence. You clearly highlight the logical gaps in their reasoning. You respectfully challenge specific causal links, exactly like we saw with those test scores. Or, and this is incredibly effective, you present alternate programs that offer even greater benefits for the exact same cost. By doing this, you're not just tearing down your opponent's house, right? You're actually offering a structurally sound alternative. You're bringing real value to the intellectual marketplace. There's a quote from our source material that just hits the nail on the head here. It says, "The goal is to elevate the conversation, not devolve it into a shouting match." And this is exactly why this whole framework matters so much for your day-to-day life. Whether you're arguing about school budgets, negotiating a contract at work, or just having a really heated debate at the family dinner table, applying this architecture keeps the focus exactly where it should be, on the problem itself, not the people. It saves your relationships while still letting you have a really rigorous, passionate disagreement. So, I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. Think about the very next disagreement you know you're going to have. Are you going to let it slip into a chaotic shouting match full of straw men and cheap personal attacks? Or are you going to use the architecture of rational discourse to elevate it into a high-level, truly respectful exchange of ideas? The choice and all the tools are completely in your hands now. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I really hope you bring just a little more rationality to your next big debate.